There are no problems at 170 pounds right now. I am enjoying this weight class so thoroughly. And guys, I want you to always keep your eye on Belal Muhammad because he's playing a different game. He's out there competing, but he's also competing for headlines. He's competing for entertainment. Let me just tell you how good Belal is, okay? He just took out Luque, who'd won 7 fights in a row. Luque, who was the backup fighter at Madison Square Garden to fight for a world championship. I mean, this is the guy. Luque just needs one more little nudge, which he's going to go and get over Belal, but Belal had different ideas. When Belal gets on the backside of that, he decides to call for a main event for himself in the coveted ABC slot. Okay, hold the thought. Back up. 2 days before this fight happened, Dana White went onto a major media outlet known as the Pat McAfee Show and said it was going to be Colby versus Chimaev in that spot. What's Belal inserting himself for? How? Why? For what? You have no chance. Well, no, not so fast. Belal knew what time it was. He studies his own division. I've come to the same conclusion that Belal came to. I don't think they have that match. I don't think they ever had the match. I don't even think they spoke to Colby about the match. Now, Dana didn't say they did. Dana just said this is the direction we're going. It was meant to be a compliment to Colby. Dana was trying to say Covington, who's a star, I'm going to take my star and I'm going to put him in the main event. Whoever wins between Burns and Chimaev is going to feed in that main event. It was meant to be something very sweet for Colby. I was just predicting, much like Belal, that that's not how Colby's hearing it. And that's not how Colby wants to get this done. It's just a guess. I also wasn't sold on the idea that the organization was willing to make that a #1 contenders match. I was leaning towards the idea, with no evidence, by the way. This is just all gut feeling when I heard this. My gut feeling was the organization would lean towards the idea that if Chimaev wins, Chimaev fights for the championship, which, knowing Colby the way I do, is going to insult him. And it's just not going to work. That was my feel. I have no wins. I never talked to Colby here, okay? This is me speaking. But that's what I felt. And Belal knew his weight and his division well enough to see the same thing. So in his last moments on the worldwide leader with the biggest audience he's going to have listening that he wants to influence, he inserts himself in a fight that's already done. And that's what we were led to believe. That's what we thought. And now all of a sudden, Belal came out 15 minutes ago. He just came out and said, I think I'm going to be fighting Chimaev next. I don't think Colby is going to do that match. I think he's right. I do. I've always thought he was right. I think Belal is going to get that fight. And now all of a sudden, it does become a #1 contenders match for both guys. I could see that. It's very different. And when I tell you that 170 pounds has no problems, it doesn't. As much as you would like to see Chimaev versus Colby, which might still be the direction we're going. I'm not breaking news here. I don't know. I'm speculating at best. But as much as you'd like to see Chimaev versus Colby, if it becomes Chimaev versus Muhammad, that means it's going to become Colby versus Burns. You got any problem with those matches I just explained? Do you have any problem with any way you want to do this round robin or even this quad? Between those 4 guys all bouncing around fighting each other, do you have any problem? Is there one that you meaningfully want to see more, or do you have an interest in all of them? It solves a lot of problems. If Colby does go on to fight Chimaev, that all gets worked out and my intuitions are off, it still brings you to Muhammad versus Burns in a most likely scenario. But all of a sudden, those two end up in the same spot that Chimaev and Colby do, which is it's a #1 contenders fight for this guy, or it's a #1 contenders fight for this guy, but not for both guys, right? Because the parity's tough. Everybody's going to give it an opportunity. Dana taught this industry a new term, and I like it. He's calling it lapping the division. Lapping the division is to refer to when not only have you beaten everybody, you're beating them twice. And that is a tough spot. To get Burns back in there with Usman is going to take a little bit of finesse. To get Colby back in there with Usman, it's going to take a little bit of explaining, a little bit of finesse. It can be done. Nobody gets shut down forever. You can prove yourself and reprove yourself. We understand that, but those opportunities usually do have a gap and a period of time between them. Colby's gap and period of time since the last time he saw Usman is 1 contest. Burns, to get back to that spot, is coming off a loss, even if we loved it, right? It's one of those things. So if you were to have an ideal world and match these up, I do think for ABC, I just think the story would be a little bit better. I do not think it would be wise for Colby or anybody else to pass on the opportunity. Paulo Costa did that. I did not agree. And I think that Paulo Costa's career is different. And an opportunity to go into ABC. A lot of guys don't focus on that in the eyeballs. A lot of guys look for something different. I hear fighters talking all the time about what makes sense. A fighter, the dumbest group that I've ever personally had is going to tell somebody else what makes sense. I mean, right? It's just from Jump Streets, it's a little bit weird. But then when they lay their case out, it all has to do with the ranking. They want to fight the higher ranked guy. They should never be asking themselves that. Ever. What fight do the fans want to see more? We don't know what anyone's ranked, and we don't care. What is going to get you the most exposure? What is going to have the most people watching? Those are the questions you want to ask, and whoever answers that question, whoever fits that mold, that's who you want your opponent to be. If you can't get that guy, defer down to a guy and then sell yourself on the idea, well, he's got a nice, beautiful ranking. You're going to be the only one that knows, but if that gives you some kind of intrinsic value, and you can falsely convince yourself that beating this guy is going to get you closer to a championship than beating a guy in a higher placement on a card in front of the whole world, that the world happens to want to see. I mean, right, it's one of these things. One is very obvious. One gets complicated. And anytime you find yourself trying to get sophisticated in the most unsophisticated business in the world, it's a fist fight. We're not building a piano here. We don't have the NASA whiteboard behind us, and we got to figure out how we're going to get to Mars by 2040. It's a fist fight. I want to do the fight that the most people want to see. So I do think it would be a missed opportunity for anybody. I also think Belal Muhammad has done everything right, and I'm pleading with you guys, while you're enjoying him and while you're appreciating him, every few years, a guy comes around and he changes the formula. I was that guy. I changed the formula, but then somebody else came on and they tweaked it a little bit too. I could go back to Colby Covington, who didn't love that they weren't putting cameras on him. He went and hired the camera crews. I could go to Kevin Lee, who wasn't getting the media opportunities. He got his credit card out, booked a whole bunch of flights all over the nation, and booked them himself. I could go to Henry Cejudo, who wasn't getting opportunities, so he just steered into it, goes and becomes a main eventer. Guys come along every now and then that change it, and you got to study them. You got to break these guys down. Belal is playing a different game, and he's playing it more intelligently than anybody else is right now. And I also think he's going to get what he wants. I do think Belal versus Chimaev is the most likely of the rumored scenarios for the coveted ABC spot.